Well, to switch gears a little, thinking of the small business owner who may be growing from their house to an office or to a small office, to a couple dozen people. What are the types of things a business owner should secure rights to first? What should they be thinking of in the beginning?
I think, well, it's going to differ company by company. I think it's good to take a look at, the company's business plan, any strategic plans, and really assess what the valuable assets are. I think, a no-brainer is the name of the company. Especially if you have something very distinctive, you want to make sure that no one else has priority over your use of that name, and also to make sure that, you'll be able to assert that name against another party if someone starts using something similar or confusingly similar in the future. I think it's also good to have some policies and agreements in place to cover, the things we were talking about before, some issues that may come up with employees or with other vendors or third-party contractors, like, having confidentiality clauses, having policies on computer use, and what do we consider a trade secret, what do we consider confidential information for our company. I do think it's worth, depending on what sort of business it is, having a really strong model services agreement in place so that if you are hiring, designers or programmers or anyone who's going to come in from the outside and help you with your services that you offer to customers, having something in place that you can use that really protects your rights instead of always depending on the service provider or vendor's agreements. And these are places where we usually do have an intellectual property clause. If someone's coming in and they're going to have access to our information, to our processes, to any intangible asset that has some value for our company, we want to make sure that we retain ownership of what we need and that they can't go and use whatever they learn with some other competitor or some other company.
Sure. We've touched on a few of the technological changes and issues that face a small business owner, but are there any we missed, especially issues taking into consideration the highly mobile workforce?
I think it's always important to be upfront with your employees and any third-party contractors about what is confidential, what's appropriate to discuss on a cell phone, for instance, or in some other unsecured environment. I think it's very important to work closely with your IT people, whether you have someone in-house or whether you're working with an outside vendor, to make sure that everybody's mobile computing is appropriately secured. Make sure you have firewalls set up. Make sure that if people are working in a public wireless environment, that confidential information or whatever else is important to your company is not accessible to the outside world. I think that that's something where there's going to be a little bit of a cost up front, but in the long run, particularly with security breaches with things, like you always hear about, like credit card servers that were hacked into, and all of a sudden everyone who shopped at a particular store in the last year has to get a new credit card, especially because those sorts of things are preventable, but there is an upfront cost. I think if your company deals with any personal information or has any other confidential information that people are carrying around on laptops or BlackBerries or talking about on their phones, that you take every precaution possible to protect that.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. Did I miss anything? I mean, are there any other topics, not necessarily technologically related, that you'd want a small business owner to think about?
I don't think so. I think the branding is probably the biggest issue that I see with small businesses. I think they start out with a name that's great, and they don't bother or don't know to necessarily clear it and have a comprehensive trademark search done or whatever it is. And then when they begin to expand, particularly when they begin to have an internet presence, so that theoretically anyone can access and learn about their company, then out of the blue there will be a third company that comes out with a confusingly similar name and either claims priority or is somehow stepping on the other business owner's toes when the business owner has priority. And so it becomes an issue, and it's something that could have been prevented earlier on if the small business owner had done a search and filed a trademark application or whatever is most appropriate to protect the mark.
And that ties into one of your first points, that it's a specialization is key. That it sounds like a business owner could make the mistake of not using someone who has that as a specialty specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sad because you see, people spend a lot of money on marketing collateral and their web presence and all of that, and to have to go and potentially change your name or alter it later after you've, worked with a designer or worked with a marketing firm to come up with this great brand, to have to change it later can be far more expensive than to have just run the original search from the beginning.
Sure. Well, and thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. It was nice to meet you.